how easy or how smooth it is to run a B&B or a short-term rental.
It's amazing to see how so many more and more people are wanting to host. Challenge primarily that comes in is no one wants to get a call on Saturday night saying, hey, the AC is not working. You might think that you can do everything, and this with doing your full-time job, it's not an easy job.
Amit Damani is the co-founder of India's largest villa rental company, StayVista. He manages over 1,000 villas across 60 plus destinations in the country.
Some of these homes that we have are in beautiful locations, top of a hill, but what happens in monsoons is that there could be a lot of rain. I remember where we had guests checking into one of our properties on a hillside, and due to the rains, a part of the bathroom's ceiling fell.
What do you think are the 3 biggest mistakes that a short-term rent owner would make and that they should avoid?
So I think
So, thanks so much for joining in. I think let's start off with the basics, just the concept of a hotel versus a homestay or a concept like a short-term rental of Airbnb. You know, some of the more traditional people, like for example, my parents will be like, I still want to stay in a hotel where everything's getting done. Is the concept picking up in India?
yeah, I think it's really it's suited for India. If you think about the way Indians travel, they love to travel in groups. And when you're traveling in groups, you want your own sort of space where you can hang out together. You want a living room where you can sit and chat till like 3 a.m. in the morning. You have your own private lawn, you have your own private pool. Versus in a hotel, people will typically spend time in the restaurant or in a crowded area of that hotel and then having to go back to their room to hang out together. If you look at the growth of this industry, in terms of supply, this is growing by 15-16% year on year. And when you look at demand, there's a 30% growth year on year taking place. This market is going from about $1.2 billion today to $3 billion in the next 5 years. So it's just growing more and more with the more awareness it's taking place for this segment.
So I think it started off with Airbnb as a concept. As a passive income stream in India in particular, is it picking up and how lucrative is it?
So I think what's happening is as a person who owns a second home, say if someone already has a home, what was happening earlier was it was a taboo to give your home out to guests. You might give it out on a long-term rental to someone to go stay there for a year or more, but you won't think you're hosting guests as a hotel. That mentality has been changing constantly. There's an inflection point that takes place in all industries, and after which people start accepting it as a norm. So now what's happening is people are buying homes to start renting it out on short-term basis from day one itself. So massive change in the way that people have thought about, hosting guests at homes. Earlier, there was a taboo that if you're giving your home out, you're short on money. Hence, you're having to do this. But now it's just a way to ensure that your place is taken care of and you're actually turning a white elephant, which was an expense, to a revenue source.
Given that this is a very lucrative investment option now, just from your perspective, can you tell us a little bit more about how easy or how smooth it is to run a B&B or a short-term rental versus what is portrayed on the outside?
Yeah. One, I think it's amazing to see how so many more and more people are wanting to host and, either buy a second home, whether it's an apartment or a villa, and start giving it out. So clearly there's an aspiration to own such homes and in a manner give it out such that they can also have access to it. The challenge primarily that comes in is on the operations front. For example, no one wants to get a call on Saturday night at 10 p.m. saying, hey, the AC is not working or there's a plumbing issue in the house, right? So those are headaches which people don't realize you will have to face. And you sort of start with the romanticism of just hosting guests. It's like opening a restaurant and you're so excited about like just, having people over. It's not an easy job. So operation, there's a lot to do. And then second, I think from the point of view of just marketing the property, getting it visibility, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of spends, honestly, to get that visibility. It's easy to just make a website, but how do you get visibility for a website? You have to spend on ads if you want to get that visibility.
Yeah. To just scratch that point further, a lot of people think that, hey, I'll just sit at home, I'll do up the house once and I'm sorted.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the myths you want to bust about short term rentals?
Um, the starting point is always easy, so it's easy to enter, but it's a long, arduous process going forward. Hospitality every day is a new day. So today you had a great check-in and check-out. Tomorrow something goes wrong at the property, your staff is unwell. How do you get another staff to come in and take care of the house? Right? In a hotel, you have 100 staff, so if someone is on leave, someone else will take care of it. In a home, there might be max 1 or 2 staff over there. So there's a lot of dependency on those factors. So I think there's a lot of day-to-day handling that goes into delivering a great experience, and people sort of romanticize too much about it.
Yeah.
It's getting into the trenches, and it's a lot of day-to-day work which people have to be ready to do.
Can you share any examples of many of instances where maybe it's gone horribly wrong for someone or not as planned, and therefore they have had to be a little bit more vigilant and on top of things?
Yeah, I mean, for example, some of these homes that we have are in just beautiful locations, and like say on top of a hill overlooking a valley. But what happens in monsoons is that there could be a lot of rain, and rain can be extremely harsh on a property. I remember where we had a guest checking into one of our properties on a hillside, and due to the rains, a part of the bathroom's ceiling fell, right?
Yeah.
And you can't control this. It's just because of how heavy the rains were. So how do you handle that situation at that point? Luckily, the guests were not checked in yet. So I mean, all of these scenarios can come up because of weather and conditions that we live in.
Absolutely. So, tell us about the Indian market right now. How many players are there in this? Is it tough to fight for market share, or is there room for everyone?
So this market is still very nascent. Airbnb, Booking.com, Make My Trip are platforms where people can just go and list their properties, and you'll start getting visibility. And each of those platforms are growing by 30-40% year on year. Versus all their other segments would be growing at single digit numbers. So there's a lot of growth taking place in this segment. When you look at the brands that are trying to manage these homes and handle a lot of homeowners, uh, we would be growing at 50-60% year on year. So very early stages in this market, and I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger over the next couple of years.
What do you think are the factors that will drive it getting bigger and bigger?
Biggest factor is on the demand side. Guests have now realized that when they're traveling in groups, so if they're a group of 4 and above people, they prefer staying at homes over hotels. So that's one big change that's taken place, and COVID also had a play in that.
Yeah.
Due to COVID, when people were living from anywhere, working from anywhere, uh, and they could like stay in an apartment or villa in Goa or in Alibag for like months to go. So we saw people starting to get aware about this segment. The second thing I would say is from the supply point of view, what we're seeing more and more is that people are considering buying an apartment or a villa in these leisure markets as their first home, because their dream is that in 10 years they'll retire there.
Oh.
But why wait 10 years from now to buy this asset? If you're getting it at a good price, buy it now, start doing short-term rentals and use the home from time to time. So start living that dream from today, at the same time ensuring that you're covering your EMIs or any expenses associated with that property.
What do you think are some of the key expenses or the fine print that a lot of homeowners overlook?
Most important thing is that when you create a home, it looks beautiful, it's all ready, but with weather and with time things deteriorate. People don't plan for those expenses, and that then becomes a challenge, right? Like if you didn't plan for it, then you had overestimated what you could spend for other things, and you don't have enough left to reinvest in your property. This is a constant cycle that we keep seeing taking place. So it's really important. In hotels, what they do is they call it a sinking fund. They keep a certain percentage aside to reinvest in the property for its maintenance. At least 5% of your overall earnings need to be kept aside just for this. There could be small wear and tear taking place, but even larger investments that are needed, say with time, as I shared, like with rains, in especially in some of these locations, you actually have to redo your roofing, you actually have to redo your tiling, you actually have to repaint your property on a more regular basis versus what you might do in a city.
And if we could break down the math of it, for example, how much is the average occupancy if we're looking at a business a city or a metro? How much are you getting? What about the rental yield? How much time would it take to actually get back to living into an apartment? If you could give us an area-wise breakup and how much one would make.
Yeah, so say in a business city, on average, if a room is 4 to 5,000 rupees, right, and if you have even a 3 bedroom place, so at 15,000 rupees and about 20 nights in a year, in a month, you'll do roughly about 3 lakhs per month. Out of that 3 lakhs, you'll have expenses, which is primarily your staff, which has to take care of housekeeping. You have electricity, you have laundry, and you have consumables like toiletries or any food items that you keep for your guests over there. That all will add up to roughly about 1 lakh or so in a month. So you will be left with about 2 lakhs per month net income that you get pre-taxes. So I think those are critical sort of expenses. It's very important that you manage that well. It's very easy that your electricity bill can shoot up if that's not handled well. It's very easy that you just overhire people and they're just sitting around because there's not enough to be done. So what's important is that, ideally, if you're investing in something like this, you should be able to share those resources better because your highest cost is your staff cost.
Okay.
So if you're actually able to share that staff cost with someone else in the same building, that will drastically reduce your cost.
And what about a leisure property? If you could break down the math for us as well.
In leisure market, say a 3 to 4 bedroom house would be roughly around 20,000 rupees a night. It would do about 12 nights per month. So that's about 2,40,000 to 2,50,000 rupees per month is what you'll do. In terms of your expenses, again, it's the same cost items, which is your person, your staff, your laundry, your electricity, and consumables. So that doesn't vary. So you'll have a cost of roughly about 80,000 or so in a month. So you're left with about 1,70,000 rupees, which you get in hand.
What do you think are the three biggest mistakes that a short-term rent owner would make and that they should avoid?
So I think first is just costs. Uh, it's super critical to manage your costs well. That's one. The second is, I think, focusing on guest feedback. We've seen a lot of people not caring as much about it. They're thinking about returns versus experience. So that's where things can go wrong.
Because it boils down to the experience.
Precisely. And now each of those experiences are visible online, right? People will write about it. And if things are negatively spoken about, even one or two of those reviews can drastically slow down your income flow going forward. So that's really critical. And third, I think, is just sort of realizing your strengths. You might think that you can do everything and do this with doing your full-time job. You might be able to do it from time to time, but can you do that consistently?
Yeah.
You can start off, you can have that energy to do everything possible for this home, but over time you'll realize that if this is not your primary focus, the property's revenue and maintenance will start dropping.
So what do you think are some of the major challenges? Regulatory, security challenges, even legal challenges?
So I think as a new buyer of a home, right? The first piece, which is a challenge, is always being clear on the titles and the documentation. It varies from location to location, right? Goa has a very different land law versus something in Himachal. So every location, it can vary, and it's very important that you work with someone who understands that, especially if you're starting from scratch. The second thing is to ensure that once you've got that home, how are you going to run and operate this if you're not staying in that city? So operationally, this can be a nightmare because in every location, there is some influence of the local panchayats over there. They'll have a requirement of the staff that you employ in your location or the material you use in your property, etc. So those are sort of just your local domestic issues that you have to solve for. And lastly, I think once you involve guests in the equation, there is a lot more effort and work that goes into it. So how do you take care of that? So
Are
all
there
three of
cases
these
of like
factors.
maybe guests overstaying their time and things like that, or that doesn't really happen?
So I think there is always a fear of something going horribly wrong at a property. Every homeowner that we speak with, when they're considering to give out their home, that's the major concern. Like, what happens if something goes drastically wrong? And at least over the last 10 years of doing this, what we can tell them very confidently is that that does not happen. And there's a 0.01 chance of something going terribly wrong. So what can go wrong, right? Let me maybe touch on that then. Uh, Typically, what can go wrong is guests come there and they're having a great time. They break this glass, or they damage this side table. They might damage some towels. Instead of 10 guests, maybe 15 guests showed up because more people decided to join the get together. But these are very like normal issues to solve for. There aren't cases where people turn up and they say, I'm not leaving this home. I've like taken this over altogether, or they have just completely destroyed the home in any way or caused a fire. We've not seen those cases happen.
So where Airbnb would be different is that you would have to do all of that work in terms of ensuring things get cleaned up and get paid for, etc. But whereas doing it with a model such as yours, you don't have that headache, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think there are two things, right? One is to manage your property, and second is to sort of market and monetize your property. Um, the managing of the property is their operational piece, which is, your staff taking care of them, taking care of your daily laundry. The second is to actually try to generate revenue out of this, which means how do you sort of ensure you're targeting the property to the right audience, you're pricing it correctly, you're getting it visibility across different platforms. All of that itself is a, full-time job, which a lot of times I think people don't realize it is. So when you spoke about, when people are thinking of doing this and buying a home, a lot of people think it's very easy to do that. In 10 minutes, I'll make my property live.
Yeah.
But what happens after that? How do you ensure that people are coming and staying there on a constant basis such that your revenue and your income plan is being adhered to?
Yeah. So, what about the rental yields? How does it differ from city to city? Any perspective that you can give, tourist hotspots versus cities, etc.?
Yeah. So I think the first difference I would say is from a long-term rental and short-term rental, because you could give a home, whether it's an apartment or a villa, or in both models. Long-term rental will typically give you 2 to 3% yield in cities. Short-term rental can give you anything from 6 to 10% yield. What's important is, and what's been very interesting for us to learn about is that in cities, location is really critical. So where that property is very important, versus in sort of the leisure markets, it doesn't matter where it is. So if someone is going to Lonavala, they don't care if it's close to the market. It could be even half an hour away from that. Versus in Mumbai, they really care about where specifically that micro market this property is in. So what that does is in leisure markets, the price at which you get a property can be much lower. You don't, because if you try to buy something in the market area, it'll be much higher. You don't need to do that. So when you compare that, like in terms of what you could potentially buy as an asset, also because it's a leisure market, but even in that leisure market, you can buy something slightly further away, which reduces the cost at which you get these properties. But that automatically increases your yield to over 10%.
Okay. And on Airbnb, I mean, we've been reading in the headlines as well about cases against a lot of the Airbnb home owners. What are the other big risks that are involved? Because it's not as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I think globally what has come in a lot of limelight is sort of there have been Airbnb parties where people have taken over homes and like trashed it for different reasons. What's very different for India versus abroad is in abroad there is no staff on site. You get the property and you've just taken it over. In India, it's very different. Every home has staff.
Yeah.
Right? And automatically there is supervision and security at these homes, which protects a homeowner. So we haven't seen any cases where people have just come there and trashed the entire property, just because the scenario is very different here.
Okay. What about reading that legal fine print when you're giving out a property on a platform such as this? Because, there's so many instances you're talking about things being damaged, things being broken. How does that work from a homeowner perspective?
Yeah, so these are costs that you have to factor in.
Okay.
You have to factor in that, and also what you invest in the property. When you're designing your home, you might go a little overboard in what you like. You might get really intricate artwork and fancy cutlery in your house. but for a guest, they might not value it. And if that gets damaged, that's something that not only is a expense, but also something that'll hurt you personally. So I think it's very important that when you invest in a home which you want to give on rentals, you sort of think about what are the right things to keep in that house as well. So the kind of cutlery and crockery you use, you want it to be a little more durable. You want a certain standard set that you keep everywhere. Automatically, you will factor those costs in and it'll be easier to cover those.
For leisure stays, isn't there just that challenge of the demand spiking up during particular periods and for the rest of the time being virtually empty, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah. So it's a good question. Generally, what we see in terms of demand is, especially in leisure markets, it's your weekends when people go. That's when people have a holiday. And people are holidaying every weekend now. So weekends is when you see your spikes. Your weekdays is when things slow down. So you have to be prepared for that. And there'll be seasons like your Christmas or your summer holidays time when demand picks up for the entire month. But other than that, there will definitely be highs and lows through the season. When it comes to business cities, yes, it's more consistent. It's every day that you have guests coming and staying there. But I think you just have to ensure your costs are linked in that manner. So in leisure markets, it's really, really critical that you keep your costs as low as possible. Versus in the business city, with higher demand, you're able to have slightly higher costs as well.
How much are you making in a leisure versus in a business city on average, if you could?
As a homeowner,
Yeah.
how much would you make?
Homeowner.
Occupancies vary. In your leisure market, the occupancy might be 35%, whereas in a business city, the occupancy will be around 70%. The difference primarily is that the pricing also varies accordingly. In a leisure market, a per room price might be around 6,000 to 7,000 rupees a night, whereas in a business city, the pricing is slightly lower. It'll be around 4,000 to 5,000 rupees a night. So when you look at that, in terms of average earnings per year, a business city property might do about 40 to 45 lakhs. A leisure market property might do somewhere between 25 to 35 lakhs.
That much of a difference, okay.
But that's your income, right? What's important is then connecting that to the potential price at which you buy that property.
Yes.
The cost of property in a business city is going to be much higher versus a leisure market. Hence, the yield can vary drastically in both markets.
True. How does the risk profile of someone who is hosting their home on an Airbnb vary from a traditional renter?
So the profile, I think, is the risk that someone is ready to take and their aspiration as well. Generally, someone who will do a short-term rental is looking to obviously get a higher return versus a long-term stay, a guest who stays there. The second I would say is that they actually enjoy hosting. They want to understand this segment better. They have a passion of hosting guests, and that's what drives them to do this as well. They get excited when they see positive reviews coming in. They get excited that their property is having more and more guests coming and staying there and talking about it. So there is this sort of sense of pride, so there's aspiration with it. The third I would say is also flexibility in terms of using the home. Why a lot of people, especially in leisure markets, give out their home on short-term rental versus long-term rental is that in a year, they want to visit that property at least 6 to 8 times. And with short-term rentals, they can block those dates and go there as and when they want.
Okay. So if you could just sort of harping on that same question, what would be the temperament of a short-term homestay renter? What do you think are the 3 virtues that they should possess?
I think one, they have to be they have to be a little sort of Zen mode.
Okay.
Why I say that is because when you get very attached to your home, it gets a little difficult to detach from it. So and when other people are coming there and staying at your home, they're not going to treat it in the same way or think about it in the same way the way you do. So there has to be some sense of detachment. That's important when you start doing this. I remember when I started giving my family home out, the first guest who came there, and I was trying to handle that guest directly.
Trashed your home?
No, he didn't trash it at all. It was a family and, but I think they had a lot of demands. And as a homeowner, you feel that, hey, I've done so much for you, this beautiful home you have access to. Like this is just seeming a little irrational, but it's hospitality. The guest is always right. So it's always good to detach yourself from that situation and let sort of professionals handle it. Was my learning. So I've never handled a guest after that in my home. I've let the professionals handle it, which is my team. So I think that is very critical, just having that sense of detachment. Because, yeah, guests can be demanding. Then the second thing I would say is, with respect to short-term rentals, you have to have a mindset of taking a risk. In long-term stays, you're getting your fixed income on a regular basis. It can vary, right? You spoke about how occupancies vary in leisure markets. A certain month you might have 25% occupancy, another month you might have 70%. So it's not stable income you're getting, but it'll vary month on month. And then the third thing I would primarily say is that you have to be patient. You know, it's important that you start thinking about how you build up revenue for your property with experience. It's not that you make a property live and suddenly it's going to start filling up. You got to ensure that you're patiently looking at how feedbacks increase, and as feedbacks increase, more and more people want to stay there. So it's a long-term game. It's not going to just get solved in going live.
Sure, but before we proceed, I also wanted to understand a little bit more about the behavioral aspect of this and the psychological aspect behind why people are going for short-term rentals. We spoke with Biju Dominic, who's a behavioral specialist. Let's hear out what he has to say.
First of all, are these real investments, or are there more underlining reasons as to why we are actually, investing in these things? And investment is just a sort of a cover-up or a justification. And I believe so. And I'll give you a reason. You ask anybody who's, been in a city like Mumbai and ask them, what is your dream, when you retire? Oh, I want to go to Goa, or I want to go to my hometown and, and then just buy a nice place, relax, no traffic, nothing, and I just stretch my legs, and somewhere that sort of builds up into a dream. And somewhere when you get some money, maybe someone else also pushes, as you said, yeah, someone else also has bought a house in Goa. Oh, let me buy it. Now, the reason they're buying it is not because they're not initially not seeing it as an investment. They say, oh, if I have buy a house, now at least I've not taken a holiday in the last 4 years. Now, at least now that I have a house, I'll definitely take at least one holiday every year. So that is 2 weeks I'll spend in Goa. Rest, they tell me Airbnb and others, we can give it out and then we can actually then make some money also out of it. So the real reason is this: there is always this other me in many of us who wants to be very different from what we are today. And this is not new. I remember in the 1990s, if I'm right, there was a company called Maxworth Orchards coming out of Chennai. And they told a lot of urban people, hey, you always have a dream of owning a little bit of farmland. So I know you don't have time to do that. So we will buy the farmland in wherever the most fertile places around. We will have agriculturists and experts who will actually plant the things around there. And every month, whatever being planted, the money will come back to you. And the number of people who went and invested in that company was so large. It is always playing on the other me who actually wants to be different. And that is why I go and buy a house in Kerala or in the up there in the Himalayas or in Goa. Now the Airbnb and giving it out for the rest of the month when I don't go is just a justification, a rational justification for an emotional decision that you actually have taken. Actually, it's because I think not many people know some of the new developments that have happened in the world of neuroscience. Until now, we used to think we are all rational people and emotions are something to be kept away. But there is work by a neuroscientist by the name Antonio Damasio. And Antonio Damasio actually found that those people whose emotional parts of the brain gets damaged, they cannot take a rational decision, which means the corollary of it is that all our decisions actually involve emotions. And further studies of the brain also shows that the first stimuli or the first reaction to any stimuli that you have is emotional. So all our decisions are emotional. Even decisions involving, as we call, millions of dollars or lakhs of rupees involving houses, we tend to think it is a rational decision. It is not. It is emotional. And then once you've taken that emotional decision, we tend to justify it with certain rational things like, oh, Airbnb, ke liye, there's a good investment. I think my big advice to when it comes to investment is don't focus on the returns. Don't focus on the returns, because as we discussed so far, returns are an outcome of a whole lot of complex factors on which we don't have information nor the ability to process that information. And I think trying to look at that, I think it's a very complex world. Best leave it to the investment advisors, the experts, to do that job for you. I think what we should be focusing on is our savings behavior. And I think, it's, do I have the temperament, or how do I develop a temperament towards savings? And once you develop a temperament for a sustained savings behavior, then things will fall in place.
I know you're not going to give any investment advice, but for, say, an individual who is making about 20 to 30 lakhs an annum, how much should they allocate in terms of spending on buying a property to generate those returns via this short-term home rental?
I think for any of these assets, right, I'm assuming they would have to spend at least anywhere between 1 to 3 CR. So it's important that either they've saved that, or they have EMIs that they could potentially get to cover these costs. And I think that's really critical. Just planning and budgeting that out is really important.
You spoke about those online reviews, and they can be super damaging. So given that Indians are pretty categorical, either it's 5 stars and amazing, or it's 0 on 5. I'm not ever going to go there. For the temperament of someone, who are the people who should avoid this?
People who don't have the patience of dealing with customer service.
Yeah.
So just ensuring that every guest is taken care of, and dealing with their questions, their concerns. If someone doesn't have the time, yeah, absolutely. So they need to have the temperament to do that.
Yeah.
I think Indian hospitality is globally really well recognized and loved, primarily because of the way in which we deal with any customer. So that's really critical. Like, now think about, like, we've been used to going to hotels and experiencing a certain way of being treated. Can you deliver the same thing to a guest?
Yeah. You started off by saying that back in the day, it was taboo to have a guest in your house for a short period of time, and then on top of that, take money.
Yeah.
But things are changing. Our mindsets are evolving very rapidly, especially with the younger generation. So where do you see this industry in the next 3 to 5 years?
What I see is that there are going to be more and more people who are going to buy this home, primarily from the point of view of keeping it as their first home and giving it out on short-term rentals. It was always being called the second home, right? Your first home is where you're staying, and second home is what you give on rentals, whether it's an apartment in the city or in a holiday destination. But that's evolving. People are thinking about staying on rental properties and investing in this first home, which will possibly be something they move into 10, 15 years from now. So they're already planning ahead, which is a big change from what we used to see earlier.
How much percentage of the people that you have are currently doing that, buying this as their first home?
Yeah, I think, when 8 years ago, when we started looking into this segment, maybe it was 0%, right? But today it's over 15, 20% of our owners have done that. So there's clearly this shift taking place, and I think that's going to grow. In the next 3 to 5 years, I think it's going to be majority of them doing it for that reason.
So if I can use the word, there's a lot of magajmari involved in this. It's not easy. So how would a platform like a StayVista make my life easier if I wanted to put out a property on short-term rent?
Yeah, so you said one M word, which is magajmari. We use 4 other M words, which is primarily monitoring the property, managing the property, marketing the property, and monetizing the. So I think monitoring the property, the first thing a lot of homeowners want is that someone to actually have their eyes on the property, because they're sitting in Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi generally. And the only people enjoying the home is the staff. So how do you have eyes on the staff to ensure that day to day the place is taken care of? The second, with respect to managing the property, is when guests are there, managing those guests. That can be, as we discussed, it can be, quite arduous and time taking to handle the guests and their requests. In terms of marketing the property, to be able to handle it on so many platforms, right? Whether it's Airbnb, Booking.com, Make My Trip, StayVista, and so many other platforms where you can market your property. Just doing that itself is a lot of work. And then from monetizing, how do you price it correctly? What are the times of the year when you should price it at a certain higher value versus lower value during certain times? So just doing all of that is what brands like us offer.
So how much do you take for it typically versus if I were to do it on my own?
Yeah, we generally take 30% of sales to do this. Again, why do we take that 30%? Simply, you will recover that 30% by working with us. Plus, we're taking away the entire hassle. So if you actually add your time value to that time of yours, this will be at least 50% return that you're getting. Yeah, so it's 30% is what you pay us, and that 30% honestly is what you recover in terms of higher income and higher pricing that you get. Additionally, if you look at the value of your time, that itself is going to add up to actually 50% or more in terms of returns that you get. Lastly, a lot of that 30% you would be paying to other platforms or managers that you might hire. So in that manner as well, there's actually nothing that you're paying extra.
Now, obviously, everyone wants to make the biggest bang for their buck, right? So, having had a look at this market, what are some of the hottest markets that you should look to buy a property in?
So the way we look at that is two factors that are important. One is with respect to the location and the proximity to where you're based or where people will travel from. The closer it is to the city that people will travel from, the better income you can make on it. And the second is the quantum of demand. So how many people are actually wanting to go there? Let me give you an example. So around Mumbai, the nearest places that people can travel to are Lonavala, Karjat, and Alibag. These properties will generally do higher business than, say, a property in Mahabaleshwar or in Nasik. So the proximity has a big factor. Similarly, in Delhi as well, if people are going from Delhi, the nearest hill station is Mussoorie. So more people will want to go to Mussoorie over even Shimla, which is 3-4 hours more travel, and Manali. The third, so that's the first bit, which is proximity. The second bit is with respect to quantum of demand. Goa as a market has demand from all over India. So people from all over India are wanting to go there versus let's take a market like Indore or Bhopal. Very limited people might be going there. So I think that's the difference, that you have to sort of identify these markets. And as I said, in each of those markets, you don't have to get a property in the hottest sort of micro market in that location. Your property can be slightly outskirts, which you will get at a lower value. But these two factors, which was your proximity to the key market from which people travel and the quantum of demand, are very critical in choosing that market.
And what is the checklist, top 5 things that you need to do when you're buying that property?
Most important is just the land deeds or those documents have to be clean. I think that's where we've seen a lot of people getting stuck. That I think is the most critical thing. Once that has taken place, the second is in that locality to operate your property. You just need to ensure with the panchayat everything is very clean and clear. You don't want a panchayat being after you for whether it's related to staff or payments on a regular basis for different donations that they like. These two become very important from a local sort of legal point of view, that things are taken care of. And then primarily it's your operations. So is the property set up in the right way? For example, if you have in cities like Mumbai, we don't think about having gensets anymore, right? But if your property is even in Goa or in other locations, like power fluctuations do take place. So you need to ensure your property has power backup. That's the most basic thing someone will ask for. And we've seen a lot of people not thinking about that because they thought they won't use the home on a regular basis. So you don't have to, if power goes for 2-3 hours, 4 hours, it's fine, we live with it. But that's not what a guest thinks about. So that's very critical from a guest perspective. The fourth is understanding, identifying the amenities that people really care about. So homes in Maharashtra, because it's a hot place to be in, villas will generally want a pool to be there. Say a city apartment, if you have even a slight area of a balcony, that's something that guests really like. So those amenities are really important to understand when you're thinking about buying those homes. And I think lastly, just sort of understanding the game of how to market your property.
Yeah.
That's really critical, especially if you're thinking of doing it yourself.
You spoke about Mumbai as well, with some of the laws and buildings and societies having issues. Can you tell us about how it differs city to city?
Yeah, so in Mumbai, I think the societies have a very, very critical role to play in deciding whether you can give your property out on a short-term basis or not. Most societies don't allow it. So, you might try to run it under the radar for a few months. I've heard people who run these properties telling guests that please ensure you do not interact with anyone in the society. So as a guest, you're already worried, like, where am I going and staying, right? So that is a concern that comes up in societies. But the same issue is not there as much in other locations. You don't face the same thing in Gurgaon. You don't face the same issue in Bangalore. Short-term rentals seems a lot easier to do in those locations. So because that society isn't as clearly formed over there.
Okay.
So I think you got to be careful with these bits, basis where you start.
I don't know, I feel very old asking this question because I thought there was only traditional buying and then giving it out on rent. But I believe that there's a concept of leasing out a property and then giving that on rent. What's happening here?
Yeah, I think it's been a traditional concept in hotels where hotel operators take a property, they lease that property from a property owner, and then they start running it as a hotel. Similarly, with apartments and villas, people have been leasing these apartments and villas and then giving it out on short-term rentals to guests. The risk, obviously, with that is that you have this fixed commitment, not only of your staff costs, laundry, electricity that we spoke about, but they have a fixed commitment of paying this lease on a month-on-month basis as well. So there, I think it's very important that that lease amount that you agree to is something that is viable.
Yeah.
That ideally should not be more than 30 to 40% of the revenue you can do. If it's above that, it's going to be very difficult for you to try to break even.
So what should be the risk profile of someone who is doing this, and typically how much should they be ready to shell out?
Honestly, the only people who should be doing this is who understand this market well.
Yeah.
So that understanding is very important. Like if I try to do this in Bombay and I've never done this before, how am I going to have that intelligence and knowledge about one, what should be the right rental, lease amount I should be giving? Second, how much income can I generate from this? So these models, ideally, you should only do once you've actually had no fixed commitment at all at other properties. And then you can sort of start doing this. The profile is extremely, extremely risk-taking.
Thank you so much for that. It's been great interacting with you. So many key takeaways. And I think some of the key takeaways of this would be, number one, it is not as easy as it looks. Number two, there's a lot that goes into it. So don't jump into it for the FOMO factor. You need to assess your overall situation before getting into it because it looks cool. And number three, you should know your financial goals, your financial profile, as well as your risk-taking abilities, and only get into short-term rentals if you think that you can handle it. Well, has this episode in any way changed your mind about short-term renting? I'd love to know, so do comment below. Do remember to subscribe to Personal Finance TV. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. Follow for more. See you on the next episode.